It's an observation of mine that I think people shy away sometimes from the label anti-theist, and the same would apply to the label atheist, because they see those labels in some cases as being a little bit harsh, perhaps offensive to religious people, to try and suggest that what they believe is wrong, or to suggest that what you believe, woe betide you, would suggest that what you believe could be superior to what they believe. And I find that kind of ironic in a perverse way when we live in a society that's dominated by Christianity and Islam, two proselytizing religions, two religions that demand of their adherents that their adherents not only believe that what they believe is superior to what anybody else believes, but that they go out there and spread that message. And seemingly society has no issue with that. We don't think, oh, how vulgar, that person describes themselves as a Christian. Oh, how vulgar, that person describes themselves as a Muslim. And yet even people who are atheists seem to have this same asymmetry with how they regard the words atheist and anti-theist, as if it's kind of bad form when that side does it, but it's absolutely acceptable socially when the religious side does it. And so it's framed in that context that I want to respond to a video by Rachel Oates, which was entitled Let's Talk Anti-Theism, where she describes why she does not label herself an anti-theist. So I'm going to play some clips of Rachel, and then at the end, because I want to discuss agnosticism at the end, a little clip of Godless Cranium and a little bit of an addendum at the end of the video there. But let's have a little bit of Rachel Oates.
Hey everyone, my name is Rachel, and today we are going to be discussing the topic of anti-theism, which is something that I didn't think was that controversial, but it turns out people have a hell of a lot to say on, especially when it comes to what I label myself. And one of the questions that his audience put out for me was to ask whether I label myself an anti-theist.
Okay, Rachel, right, Rachel, look, this might seem petty, it's just a little thing, but you are this close from calling your arse your fanny, right? This close from calling the petrol that you put in your car gas, even though it's quite clearly a fucking liquid. This close from not even being able to say Worcestershire sauce anymore, or at least not being able to say it without sounding like Donald Trump after he's had 1.5 bottles of whiskey, which you'll have spelt with an E. Right. It's anti-theist, not anti-theist. You and I, Rachel, we are from England. We're not the fucking Dukes of Hazzard.
So the first thing I want to talk about in regards to this, like, am I an anti-theist discussion, is what I think is probably the most important point to me. But I know a lot of people are going to criticize it for being, like, wishy-washy, and, like, I know a lot of people aren't going to like it, but for me personally, the labels don't really matter. I don't care about them that much. It comes back to, remember ages back, like I'm talking like 6 months ago when I made my first video referencing feminism, and I just like made this throwaway comment of like, yeah, I think I'm a feminist, and then there was this huge discussion in the comments about like, oh, you're not really a feminist, you're an egalitarian. Oh no, she is a feminist because maybe. I'm like, does it really matter? Just call me what you want. Like, the labels don't matter to me. What matters is that I'm all for gender equality. That's the important thing there. Whether I'm a feminist or an egalitarian, the label doesn't really matter to me that much. And it's the same here. I don't really care if you want to label me an anti-theist or not. I personally don't think I'd use that label just because I'm not quite prepared to take on everything that I think comes with that label. But if some person sees some of my views and thinks, oh yeah, I think she's an anti-theist, I'm not going to really complain about that much.
It's always nice to start on a point of agreement, and I have a point of agreement here. I wouldn't have done if I'd made this video some years ago, but I've mellowed on this. It used to really get under my skin. If the labels that people applied to themselves didn't make up with the labels that I wanted to apply to them, that got under my skin. It doesn't anymore now. Even in some quite extreme cases, such as in the United Kingdom, when asked the question, do you believe in a god or gods, only about a third of people answer in the affirmative. Now, by any reasonable definition of the word atheism, an atheist, if you're asked the question directly, do you believe in a god or gods, and you give an answer that amounts to no, then you're an atheist. But 2/3 of people in the United Kingdom don't call themselves atheists, right? Is that an issue for me? It isn't anymore. I can live with that. I'm happy with the fact that I can still apply the definition, any reasonable definition of atheist, and regard them as atheists without them using the label for themselves. So it's not an issue for me. And it isn't an issue for me on its face. Rachel doesn't label herself an anti-theist. But Rachel goes above and beyond that in this video, and she spends a lot of time outlining her reasons why she doesn't regard herself as an anti-theist. And what that uncovers is the fact is that effectively this is based upon a lot of misconceptions as to what an anti-theist is. And effectively, if we were to take Rachel's definition of what an anti-theist is on board, then anti-theists would be amongst the most extreme radicalized people on the entire planet. That couldn't really be further from the truth. It is one of the most mundane things that you could be in reality, and so that's why I want to make this video. And if Rachel deigns to watch this video, then I hope that she will reconsider it in that light. Okay, let's carry on.
But ultimately, I think instead of taking on a label or not, I think what matters is that I'm willing to openly acknowledge and condemn the times when religion is harmful, but similarly, I'm willing to remain impartial at times, and I don't just want to go into everything with this, well, it's religion, so it's going to be terrible attitude. I think it's important that every time I talk about religion on my channel and make a judgment about things in a video, I want to go into it with kind of as little bias as possible, and I want to go into it being able to kind of like judge each specific case, and I want to be able to acknowledge when a group of people who may be religious do something good, and I want to acknowledge when a group of people who may be religious do something harmful.
So I think what you say here, Rachel, is a credit to you, but I think there's a lot going on here. I mean, the basic point that you're making, I agree with, right? You're aspiring to a kind of open-mindedness, which is an aspiration that I share with you here. But it isn't a label that hems you in from achieving that. It's the views that you have. And if you have views that allow for that open-mindedness, then the label shouldn't be the issue, I don't think. And in fact, in some ways, it can come across as a little bit disingenuous to eschew a label that maybe should apply to you simply because you want to be seen as even-handed, right? Because what we need when we evaluate people's beliefs is we need to know what their starting point is. And if people try and hide their starting point, shroud it up so that they appear a little bit more neutral than they actually are, then that's a reason for us to be somewhat skeptical of the points that they make. And it isn't necessary. I mean, even if you take somebody like William Lane Craig, who every sinew and every bone in his body is Christian, right? He will happily admit that atheists don't just hypothetically do good things, they actually do good things. And he will give you examples of atheists that do good things. He doesn't say atheism precludes you from doing good things, right? No, he doesn't say that at all. Right, so he can be open-minded towards atheists even though he nails his flag to the Christian mast. And I think there's a bit of a conflation in what you were saying here between neutrality, and you're clearly not neutral, and why should you be? You've had evidence to go on and you've arrived at decisions in your brain, and open-mindedness. Open-mindedness is the goal, not neutrality, is what I would say.
So if we go into this kind of whole topic and take the definition of anti-theism to be the belief that theism and religion are harmful to society and people, and that even if theistic beliefs were true, they would be undesirable. That's the definition that we're going to take.
So this is where it all starts to go a little bit off the rails, I think, as Rachel starts to give us a definition of anti-theism. I would have to say to Rachel, I don't know where you got this definition from, but don't allow the likes of Nightmare Fuel to define anti-theism for you. He might be an anti-theist, but he represents a very, very small, hardcore subset of what constitutes anti-theism. I think in terms of what Rachel says, there's two major bones of contention I have here that I think are profoundly wrong. The first is this claim that anti-theists are saying that even if God exists, we shouldn't believe in God. And the second is this claim that religion and theism always do harm in every situation. She didn't say it, no, in the clip that I've just played you, but if you go and listen to the next 5 or 10 minutes, several times she returns to this theme that anti-theists, according to her, are claiming that in every situation religion does harm, and that is not the claim that's being made. I think it might be useful, before we go into that in a little bit more detail, if I was to sketch out, and this is always a controversial thing to do, but let me give you a graphic, talk you through it, and I'll sketch out the relationships of what we mean, I think, between atheism and theism, and religion and pro-theism and anti-theism. That might be a worthwhile exercise, just to make sure we're all on the same sheet. Okay, so here we go, and let me start sketching this out for you here. So I think on a sort of basic layout, we've got the belief that no gods exist, and we have the belief that a god or a gods exist. And most people would understand at a very rudimentary definition that on the left is what constitutes atheism, that particular doxastic attitude, that particular belief, and that on the right constitutes theism. But that's quite a simplistic way of looking at it, right? I think perhaps a more sophisticated and encompassing way of looking at it would be again to have the no gods on the left, but then on the right we're going to subdivide it between what we would be talking about deist notions of gods and personal theistic notions of gods. And indeed we can subdivide that a little bit more, because amongst these deist notions of gods we have the traditional deist notions of God, the classic examples, which is very much along the lines of the kind of superlative Yahweh being, but without the personal interventionist touch. But then we have more modern forms of deism, and what I'm meaning by that is things like the belief that perhaps the universe is a simulation. So who's running the simulation? Well, it could be somebody very similar to ourselves, but nevertheless there would be the god of the entities which were in that simulation. Or maybe the idea that as we could create a universe in our own laboratories, right, maybe our universe has been seeded in the laboratory of another agent, no more supernatural in itself than we are in ourselves, but nevertheless that would be a god of our universe, because it would be the creator of our universe. Okay, so what we have there is we have deism in contrast to theism, and that gives you the idea of the two understandings of theism. Theism is incorporating all God belief, and theism is in contrast to deism. But it also means, and this is a bit controversial, but atheism has a little bit of a blurry boundary here, because some of those examples of modern deism, a lot of people who regard themselves as atheism, which is actually how we define atheists, would accept those notions. Now, typically when we talk about religion, we would think that most atheists and most deists we regard as not religious people. It's not always true, but it's typically true. Whereas generally theist people who believe in a personal theistic God are almost always religious, okay? When we're talking about pro-theism and when we're talking about anti-theism, what we're talking about here relates to theism in this narrower context, in contrast to deism, and which almost always aligns with religiosity, right? We're talking about it in those senses there. So the reason that I showed that is largely because I wanted to make the point that anti-theism isn't particularly well named, because it may suggest that it's opposition to belief in gods generally, but I propose that it isn't really. It's an opposition to theism in the narrower sense, to belief in personal theistic gods, and especially the religious baggage that goes along with it. So to return to the points that Rachel made, the first point that she was making was that effectively anti-theists are people who believe that you should not believe in a god or gods, even if that god or gods existed. And I found that point one of the most absurd claims that I've ever heard. I have no idea where you're getting that from, Rachel. I have never heard a single person ever espouse that particular view. It makes absolutely no sense. Now, in actual fact, the opposite point of view of that does make a little bit more sense. That's the kind of perspective that somebody, I suppose, like Friended has, which is that even if a god or gods does not exist, there is still value to be found in religion, and maybe more value to be found in religion than is lost through religion. So that kind of pro-theism, whilst a god doesn't exist, makes a lot more sense than the opposite. After all, to not believe in a god, to try and convince yourself that a god doesn't exist when that god does exist, is akin to me arriving home and finding hungry lions marauding around my house and saying, well, I'm just going to carry on as if they're not there. I'm just going to ignore them and pretend they don't exist. That's a recipe to get fucking eaten 10 seconds later. If an omniscient, omnipotent God who expects me to behave in line with his or her wishes exists, I better fucking well get with the program, right? And not bury my head in the sand. Let me be in no doubt as an anti-theist, if God existed, right, then we need to abandon it all and start doing what that God is telling us to do. Pretty fucking sharpish, I would suggest. That is one of the most absurd suggestions I've heard, not least because I've never heard a single anti-theist ever make that suggestion. The second suggestion is this claim that anti-theists take this very hard-line position that religion never does any good. That isn't the position. That may be the position of some anti-theists, but the baseline anti-theist position is that on balance, religion does more harm than good in a particular society. It is a frankly outlandish claim for anybody to make, that's saying that over the centuries that religion has existed in dozens, if not hundreds of societies, it's only ever had a negative effect. You know, you're making anti-theists sound about as rational as the fucking Taliban when you're saying that. It's no wonder if that is what you believe anti-theists believe, that you wouldn't want to label yourself as an anti-theist, but anti-theists actually hold a much more moderate position than the position that you've outlined there.
So in that case, yes, I do believe that a lot of religions are, on the whole, harmful to people and harmful to society, and I do think that on the whole we'd be better off without them. That's not to say I think the world would be a better place without religion, because I think on the whole it would.
But you're tilting at windmills here, Rachel, because that isn't what anti-theism is claiming. Let me give you, I'll tell you what I'll do, right? I'm going to give you my UK test, right, as to whether or not you're an anti-theist. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to present some data to you, and all I want you to do is to view this data and then to consider what your thoughts are, your feelings when you listen to this data. Okay, so let me show you the data. And the first data is going to be a chart here from the British Social Attitude Survey back in 2012, which asked the question, which religion do you belong to, if any? Have a look at that. 36% Church of England, 34% no religion. Watch as we go from 1985 through to 2012. You have a look at this. You look how that changes over. Look how the no religions are growing, and look how the Church of England Anglican is shrinking. Look how the no religion's grown there. And if you looked at the more recent data, it's even bigger than that. It's over the 50% now with the most recent data. Now have a look at this. This is no religious affiliation cohort analysis. Just have a look at this data. People born back in 1916, 1925, look, percentage not belonging to religion, only about 20-odd%. One of the features of this is that people keep their level of religiosity throughout their life. But you'll see as we get to more recent cohorts, people get less and less religious. The percentage not belonging to religion gets greater and greater. Starts at about 20%, goes to about 24%, 30%, 40%, 50%, 60%, 65%. Okay, so that's a huge increase in the percentage of people that don't belong to a religion in the United Kingdom. Okay, so I've shown you two pieces of UK data there. Okay, what I'm asking is for you to consider how you feel about that. I propose to you that if you see those two pieces of data and think, I'm happy with the direction that this is going. People are becoming less religious as a society. Each generation is clearly less religious than the previous generation. If you see that as overall a good thing in the United Kingdom, then you are an anti-theist, right? But if you see that as some people do and you're concerned by that and you want to kick back against that and you want to turn the tide and that and you want to see society become more religious, right, then you are a pro-theist. If you see that data and you feel either ambivalent or apathetic about it, it doesn't really matter. The data could be the other way around. You wouldn't feel any better about it or any worse about it. You don't think it makes any difference. Then I would say that you are truly neutral. Then you are genuinely neither a pro-theist nor an anti-theist, right? If that is the position you hold. But I'm getting, given what you've said, that that is not the position that you hold.
But, okay, summary points are, I'm totally cool with people who call themselves anti-theists, and I do respect that in a lot of people.
Rachel, what? Look, if I was a robot, I'd be going, does not compute, malfunction, right? Because it just doesn't make any sense. On the one hand, you're outlining a definition of anti-theism and anti-theists that has them believing that even if God existed, you should just pretend that he doesn't. That of all the societies over all the centuries where religion has been an integral part of that society, it's not done a single thing that's caused any benefit whatsoever. That is what you believe that anti-theists believe, right? They're kind of some kind of hardline Taliban-esque bunch of moronic cunts, right? And then the next minute you're saying, oh, I have a lot of respect for anti-theists, right? You know, I absolutely understand where they're coming from. How can you, if they believe one of the most moronic things known to mankind, right? That just doesn't make any sense.
And I know a lot of people are anti-theists, and I think they're awesome. I have no issues with that.
And that is because anti-theism is a much more reasonable and measured thing than how you've presented it in this video.
The only thing is, I think there's a lot of kind of baggage associated with being an anti-theist in terms of what it implies about your views, and I'm just not comfortable taking that on yet, because I don't think every single tiny aspect of every religion in the world is completely terrible.
And I am absolutely fine with that, for you or for anybody else, but at least let's be clear about what it is actually about and not create ridiculous straw men.
But anyway, enough of my rambling. I want to pass this over to you guys now, because I think this might cause a little bit of a debate, and I do kind of want to hear, I do want to hear your views on this.
So I'm going to leave you, Rachel, with a bit that I'd really like you to consider, if you could be so kind, with regard to labelling yourself an anti-theist. And that is to ask you, if you are not an anti-theist, what is motivating what you do? It can't be atheism. We both live in a country where, I discussed the stats, effectively 2/3 of the people in the country class as atheists, but they don't feel motivated to make a YouTube channel that is generally devoted to criticising personal gods and religion. But you feel motivated to do that, and I have felt motivated to do that. So what is it that describes that, right? It's got to be a lot more than just simply a lack of belief in God. If all you had was a lack of a belief in God, you'd go, yeah, I don't believe in God, so what? Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if everybody else believes in God. Doesn't matter if nobody believes in God. The fact is that both you and I go a little bit further. We go a stage further than that. And we look at religion and we look at the belief in personal gods and we say, on balance, in our society, we think this is overall a source for harm, that our societies would be better if generation on generation the level of religiosity dropped, right? That is what anti-theism is describing. It is describing holding that position. That is a position that very demonstrably you hold by dint of the fact that you are motivated to have a YouTube channel, video after video, criticising religion. Atheism doesn't describe that. What label are you going to use to describe that? I've got a label ready made for you. That label is anti-theism. Why would you throw that label away when it's a perfectly good label and you have no other label to have in lieu of it? Okay, that's pretty much what I wanted to say to Rachel there. Godless Cranium made a response and he made a point about agnosticism. I want to make a quick comment about that. Let me play you the clip from Godless Cranium.
When that failed, I identified as an agnostic for a while, and gradually I came to grips with the label of atheist. I found that when I identified as an agnostic, most religious people took that to mean that their worldview was just as valid as mine, and therefore they were justified in their beliefs. I didn't feel that way, and by adopting the atheist label, I was able to adequately express my disbelief in any deity, and tell any believer who asked that I did not believe their deity existed, and that I likely had solid reasons for my disbelief.
So the reason that I brought this up is because Godless Cranium started talking in that video about agnosticism, and it made me think about it, and putting it alongside, setting it alongside the comments that I wanted to make with regard to labels generally, because agnosticism is one of those labels that actually, although I do generally hold this position that people can label themselves however they want, this is the one exception where it really kind of gets under my skin. And the reason is this: the general reason out there that most people who label themselves agnostic label themselves agnostic is because what they're trying to say is, well, I don't know. Right. And they're trying to take this position, this absolutist position, that obviously when it comes to a question, unless you can absolutely prove beyond any shred of doubt whatsoever that something is the case, then you should adopt a position of don't know. And they say that as if that's the way we handle everything, when it is in fact the way we handle absolutely nothing whatsoever other than this one question. And that is the bit that really irks me. You could ask this same question, you could ask these same people about ghosts, fortune telling, alien abductions, magic, communicating with the dead, and they'll happily tell you what they believe and don't believe and say, no, I don't believe in any of those things, right? Now, if you then said to them, so are you saying there's absolutely no possibility whatsoever that these things could be true? They would say, well, yeah, I mean, they've not been absolutely deductively disproven. There always remains the finite possibility, but I don't believe in them. But for some reason, when it comes to this God question, all of a sudden different rules apply, and unless we can absolutely categorically disprove it, right, then we should say we don't know. That's the only they'll even say, they have the audacity to say that's the intellectually honest position to take. Fucking hell, if that's the intellectually honest position to take, how come it isn't every other time? How come when I say to you, is your mother a serial killer, you don't say, well, I'm going to have to declare myself as a don't know because I may have been in a coma for the past 5 years. Or maybe on the odd occasion when I don't see my mother, she could be going out killing people. Of course they don't fucking say that, because nobody approaches any question whatsoever from that reference point other than this one question. Other than this one question to be bollocks. Because it's not even this one question that's approached in this manner. It's one half of this one question. What do I mean by that? What I mean by that is everybody from chief rabbis through to archbishops of Canterbury through to popes have admitted that they have doubts. And if you, when they've been asked, do you accept that there is some finite possibility that you could be wrong in your beliefs? They say, well, obviously there's some finite possibility, but this is my faith and this is what I believe. Blah, de, blah, de, blah. Nobody points the fingers at them and says, well, to be intellectually honest then, you're agnostics as well. You should be don't knows. It only ever seems to apply to the atheist side, doesn't it? If you're a theist, you're allowed to have doubts. It's allowed to be based on a balance of fucking probabilities. And yes, overall, you think that God almost certainly exists. That's good enough. That's good enough. The same rules will apply to that as every other fucking question known to mankind. Right, but if you don't believe in a God, then all of a sudden not only does this different set of rules apply, but we're supposed to all pretend that that's just absolutely a reasonable way to carry on. And why would anybody approach the question in any manner other than that? And as you can probably tell, that gets a little bit under my skin. And that's the issue that I have with the label agnostic. Okay, right, thank you for watching this video. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.